Hello and welcome to this short walkthrough of the refreshed practical story frameworks. These are the outlining documents that I have been developing over the past few years, and I believe that I have gotten to a final version, finally. So I kind of wanted to walk through these with you today and show you all how you can access these for free yourself. So here I am on practicalscreenwriting.com. That is my website if you are unfamiliar. And if you just scroll down this main page here, you will see Get the Practical Story Framework Free. If you click this button, it's going to take you to this Google Drive here, and you will see 4 different versions of the Practical Screenwriting Framework here. Now, you can easily download these with the button here, or you can also click File, Make a Copy. I will show that to you in a moment. So if you want these documents yourself, you can also come in here, File, and you can click Make a Copy, and that will add it to your Google Drive. So let me walk you through these frameworks, how they work, and also show you the variations between the 4 different frameworks that you can see here. First and foremost, my favorite one, the Practical Screenplay Framework. So, first and foremost, you have a logline section, and I've also included video resources throughout this document. I know I have a lot of different videos on my YouTube channel covering screenwriting from different angles and also from different points in the evolution of my point of view on writing. And so these documents will give you what I believe is the most beneficial video on YouTube for you to watch within each of the different sections here. You can see all the different tabs over here. If this is closed to you, you can always click that little hamburger icon here and see all of the different elements of the framework document. So first and foremost, the log line. When main character encounters inciting incident, they must achieve goal before stakes. Watch that video. Then we go to setting up the chessboard of your story. And the reason I call it this is I really see creating a story as 2 main pieces. There is setting up the board and then sending those different pieces into motion. If you don't know the pieces that are supposed to be on the board, it's harder for you to actually send them into motion. First and foremost, the first thing I have here is the philosophical conflict. Your story is going to come into, it will distill down into essentially 2 sides, right? Belief 1, belief 2. You can also call this the lie versus the truth, or the dominant values versus the underdog values. These kind of become the 2 sides of the conflict, and different characters have their specific points of views within this larger idea, but it is essentially a yin-yang, right? Black, white, just like a chessboard would have one team versus the other team. Then you go into your concept. The concept is connected heavily to the philosophical conflict in the sense that when we have belief 1 and belief 2, that will externalize into physical space, physical reality in the story, into concept side 1, or dominant world, versus concept side 2, usually underdog characters. And again, I have 2 video resources for you to get some examples of seeing these concepts actually play out. From there, we go into key characters. When you're creating a character, you can think about how they look, how they sound, what they wear, all of these pieces, but really the core of a character is coming into this trinity, which is essentially the beliefs, the emotions, and the external desire. So, as you can see here, this is also a trinity. We have the beliefs, we have the external world, and then the characters. You could also think of the characters as the emotional soup of the story, right? It's a 3-in-1. Beliefs, philosophy, worldview, concept, physical space, physical reality, characters, emotions, how we're actually seeing the story play out. And then again, each character is also this trinity of a 3-in-1: beliefs, emotions, and physical desires. So when you're thinking about each of your characters, ask these questions. First, the belief. What does the character believe? Usually it will be one of these two sides here, right? Do they believe the lie, or are they on the side of the truth? And then they might have their specific position within these two larger ideas, but it will come down to one side or the other. Then the need. Essentially, what emotional blockage is keeping your character from finding the truth? That's the best way to think about the need, right? Because a lot of the times when a character is going to go through an arc, they're not just going through a belief arc, they're also going through an emotional arc. And so they usually have some sort of emotional blockage that is holding them back from seeing a new worldview. And then ultimately, what is their want? What do they actually desire in the physical world? What are they going after? Is that going to a physical location? Is that money? Is that they want to find or get a specific character? What do they actually want in the real world? And this continues for your antagonist, your main opposition, and then we also have the fake ally and the fake opponent. And these two take us right down into four-corner opposition. Where do the characters sit in the physical world, and also which camp do they belong to? So when we're thinking about a story, you are going to have the clear black and white two sides. What seems like the clear good guys, usually your protagonist, the mentor, the allies, the clear bad guys, the antagonist, the other opponents that are with that antagonist. But then we also have these two gray zones. And the gray zones are, just like I've said, your fake opponents, and again, there can be many of these, are opposing camp allies. So this would be characters that are within the villain's camp, right on the villain's side, but are actually in support, maybe philosophically or even externally, they're in support of our good guys, right? They are traitors to the villain. And the other way, we have the fake ally. These are in-camp enemies. These are traitors to your hero. These are your Judas characters, right? And all of your characters are going to fit into this basic four positions, right? So when we're talking about gray characters, morally gray characters, it's very difficult for them to be outside of these clear four positions. And if you think about your story and you think about your different characters as falling into one of these four categories, it helps you to create a story that's clear while still having gray area, right? You can still create gray area within the sort of clear black and white conflict between obvious good guy, obvious bad guy. Then going into character hierarchy and relationships. So side characters, and really all characters, exist in a hierarchy and can be attached to a main character to help them debate choices in scenes when other main characters are not present. So when you have a cast, let's say, of 15 characters in a story, it doesn't make sense to make all 15 of them main characters, right? What makes sense is to have, something like 4 to 6 main characters, and then we have these side characters that essentially help whatever main character they are attached to make decisions, figure things out, move the story forward, this sort of thing. Also, I've just mentioned that like the fake ally and the fake opponent can also be side characters for these two main characters. It just depends on what kind of story that you're building. But the idea too is to separate out these side characters into being the devil on the shoulder or the angel on the shoulder, right? So when your main characters are making decisions, your side characters are arguing for the lie, one side of the belief, or they're arguing for the truth, and they are standing on the shoulders speaking to the main character about what decision the main character should make. And again, side characters continued. This is just to add as many characters as you need to the story here. Coming into key story locations. So key story locations or setting pieces are important places where major story events take place, usually with many important characters involved in that one single location together. And again, here is another video where you can get some examples of these different things. But this is another thing that you should be thinking about that's going to help your story be unique. So where is the protagonist's home or base? Does the antagonist have a base or a lair, right? The Death Star comes to mind as being a huge lair and a very iconic setting piece for a particular character, right? For the dark side in the story. So these are key character locations, and then we can also have key locations within each act, right? So what important locations are in Act 1, and where does the Act 1 climax take place? These are questions that you can ask yourself throughout the story, right? Because the locations in your story should be interesting and memorable, not just random and unimportant. Each of them are going to, ideally, be characterized well for the story that you're telling. Down to story items. Harry Potter's wand, Excalibur, the Ring of Power, Cinderella's slipper. What important items and symbols are attached to characters in your story? So you can have items that are connected specifically to particular characters. And you can also have key location items. So the boulder in Indiana Jones, Inside Out's core memories, the case in No Country for Old Men. What important items do characters encounter in the key locations in your story? And this is another place where you can just think and brainstorm as you are building the basic building blocks of your story. So as you can see here, as we go through the first half, right, like I said, this is the setting up the chessboard of your story. You're going to be thinking about the beliefs in the story, the concept of your story, the key characters within that story, how those key characters are set up in their beliefs as well as their physical positioning, right? And then how do your different characters fit into a hierarchy? Who are all of your side characters? What are the key locations? What are the key story items? And then this gives you all sorts of, it gives you the sandbox, right? It gives you all this Play-Doh that you can then use to come into this. The chess moves. Now we send the pieces of the story into motion. First, this is something that you can use these questions to think about your character's arc. And I have a video here as well. What is your character's lie? What truth must they learn to make the right choice in the climax? How is learning this truth attached to a meaningful character relationship? This goes back to the need. What do they need from this other character to realize the truth, right? So this is where the emotional attachments of the character are being connected to the philosophical truth, right? The worldview, the belief that they need to see, right? So when you have a big moment in a story, it's not just going to be that they adopt a new worldview. It's usually going to be connected to an emotionally important character for your main character or for whoever is going through the arc, right? Many characters can go through an arc, but of course the most important arc will be your main characters. Now this is the story outline. So you will fill in your story circle beats to create a clear structure in each act. I've made many videos about the story circle on my channel, but I think the best one in terms of creating an act will be my how to write a perfect climax video, because this is not only taking the big picture understanding of the story circle, it's also showing you kind of how the scenes are fitting within this. And then you will write a 1-sentence description per scene, noting the key turning point for each scene. Each scene falls under a key story circle beat, like I have showed you here, right? So you have one main story circle per act. You shouldn't have a story circle for every single character. You can do that if it helps you think about the character's arc, but in terms of the actual act structure, there's going to be one single story circle, and that single story circle is the story circle of the hero versus the villain, the protagonist versus the antagonist, and the back and forth that you're seeing between those two. Now, generally speaking, most screenplays have 12 to 24 scenes per act, and I have expressed that here. Also, what I have done is shown you usually how many scenes, give or take, are falling under each of these story circle beats, and it's not equal, right? So the beats of the story circle are not perfect pizza slices. They are uneven, and I'll show you that here. So usually you have some scenes to set us up, right? Where are our characters when we meet them? Goal established. What do they want? What do they desire? Even if they're not actively going after something yet, we want to understand what our character wants, right? Do they want to go on an adventure? Do they feel that something is missing in their world? Do they want to be rich? Do they want to build something? Do they want to go after the girl, right? We're getting a sense of what they want, even if they haven't yet taken the major action to go after it. The 3 is the inciting problem. This is the inciting incident for the act, and in Act 1, it's going to be the inciting incident for the entire story. And this is usually where the antagonist, the villain, the opposing force makes some sort of first move. Now, from here, you will see the most amount of scenes are under the 4. And the 4 is the adapt to the inciting problem, right? How are we handling this new opposition that has come into the story? And then ultimately there's going to be some sort of choice of commitment. The choice of commitment, again, you will see this more if you watch this video here, How to Write a Perfect Climax. But the idea is there's going to be some sort of key choice that is sending us towards the 5, sending us towards the goal here. And again, the longest part of your act is going to be here, under the 4. So a lot of times, right, we introduce our characters, we set up what they want, we set up the initial problem, and now the act is moving, right? We're solving problems, we're going after, this is where the meat of the act usually is, in the kind of first half of the act. Then we finally get to the 5, the goal achieved. This is usually either they get some version of what they're going after, right? They don't usually get what they want completely, but they have made major progress. For example, in the first act of Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, the Act 1 5, the Act 1 goal achieved, is when Frodo gets to the inn at the Prancing Pony at Bree. So in the beginning of the story, the inciting problem is that they find the ring, and Gandalf tells Frodo, meet him at the inn at the Prancing Pony. And so then, the 4 of that first act is Frodo and the other hobbits trying to get to the inn at the Prancing Pony while the ring wraiths are looking for them through the Shire, right? So we have all these different scenes where the ring wraiths are after them and they're moving around and all of this until we finally get to the inn at the Prancing Pony. Now, the 6, the surprise problem, and the 7, climactic choice, usually happen together in the climactic scene of the act. So these beats are very short comparatively, right? Because it's what makes your climax, right? So in that act of Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Act 1, we get to the Prancing Pony, and then we kind of have these couple of slower scenes where Frodo realizes that Gandalf is not there, which is also part of the surprise problem. But he realizes Gandalf is not there, and so we kind of have this waiting around, right? They're drinking at the end, they're waiting for something to happen until the ring wraiths show up. When the ring wraiths show up, now we have to make this climactic choice. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to trust Strider. We're going to trust Aragorn because we have no other option, and this takes place in this climactic moment, in this climactic scene. So, and now we have new character status quo, which kind of, again, can bleed into the next act. The 8 and the 1 can kind of be connected here. They don't have to be perfectly separate, but the idea is now that this climax has taken place in the act, something has changed. And in the Fellowship of the Ring, the new status quo is now they're with Aragorn on this new path. So that's essentially how it works. That's how a single act works. And I show you this over and over in the 4 acts of a screenplay. Screenplays have 4 acts, not 3. Screenplays have 4 acts, not 3. So in traditional screenplay structure, you might hear script gurus talk about the break into 2, which is the point where we go from act 1 to act 2. That is the act 1 climax. They will also talk about the midpoint. That is the act 2 climax. They will talk about the break into 3. That is the act 3 climax. And then they will talk about the climax of the story, which is the act 4 and final climax of the story. So from my perspective, it doesn't make sense to have a second act that is double the length of the other 2 acts and has its own midpoint climax. Like, there's 4 acts in a screenplay, and that's what I show you here. Now, writing individual scenes. Absolutely watch this video. I think it's one of the most important videos I've ever made on my channel, how to write a perfect scene. Please take a look at this video. If you take nothing else from this document, and you're like, I don't want to do screenwriting structure, I don't want to have a 4-corner opposition that's clear. Okay, that's fine, but you need to have clear choices in your scenes, and that is what I show you in this video. And then if you need to get more specific, if you have a scene that's bugging you, or if it's a larger scene that you need to get real clear on what's going on, you can ask these questions that I also show you in this video here. Character 1, who wants what in the scene? Who is in their way? Scene object, what important object is the debate over? What is the important object the debate is over? Choice presented, will A or B be chosen? Because scenes are about choices, right? Conflict is about a decision point. So then side A versus side B, where do all the characters in the scene stand on the choice? Who has the power of the choice? Who actually is making the decision? Because it's not all the characters that get to make a decision. It's going to fall on one main character to make the decision in the scene. Stakes raised, how is pressure built on the choice, right? How do we get to that? What's going to happen? And then choice made, what option is chosen? Now, setups, reminders, and payoffs, story symbols in motion. So remember those story items that I mentioned to you above, those would be right here. The story items like Harry Potter's wand, Excalibur, the Ring of Power, these kinds of things. Down here, take your story items listed above, key lines of dialogue, and important story information, and weave them throughout the story. We should see these elements more than once. And here's 2 videos taking a look at setups, reminders, and payoffs for you. And here is just some simple questions that you can ask yourself. Where are the important items in Act 1? How are they involved in the story? Act 2, how might the items change hands in the new situation? How might they be used, right? The point is, how do we see a shift and a using and a movement of these different items? And then at the end here, what is the final payoff of the important story items in the script? And that's pretty much it. So this version is now way shorter than the older versions of the framework that I had. I have really condensed the story outline part down so that it's a lot clearer here. Rather than having like a story circle separate from the scene outline, I have condensed it down into one clean, crisp outline so that this document is not so massive. And that's pretty much it. That is the big pieces that you should think about as you're hopping into a draft. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything fully understood and figured out, but this gives you a much better sense of what are the different buckets, what are the different elements, what are the different pieces of your story that you can throw down ideas before you're actually hopping into that draft, so that you have a much better sense of what you're looking at here. Now, let me go to the other versions. I'm not going to go through every single piece that I have already done, that I have already walked through, but what I want to show you is kind of some of the differences here. So in a short script, this is the practical short script framework. Again, you have your beliefs, you have your concept, you have your key characters. That is all the same. I have less side characters here because usually it's going to be a smaller story when you're writing a short. Still have key locations, you still have story items, you still have the chess moves. In the story outline, I've made this one smaller. You still have the most amount of scenes in this 4 heading up to the 5, but it's usually going to be shorter, and you also have one single act. So usually if you're writing a short script that is 30 pages or less, it's one single act. Don't try to make it 2 acts or 3 acts or 4 acts. That's just going to confuse you. You're writing a 1-act story. And shorts can also be helpful practice for writing something longer like a feature, because it helps you nail that 1-act short story structure. And I have included a video here, how to write a short film. You may have seen my Stutterer short film if you've been watching my screenwriting content for a while. This is the better video to watch. This how to write a short film video is taking an episode of Rick and Morty and essentially viewing it as if that Rick and Morty episode is a short script, because it essentially is, right? You have an A story and a B story, and so I'm taking the A story of that TV episode and showing how it's essentially a short script, because the structure, the philosophical conflict, the character movements are all very clear and strong, and so definitely take a look at that video. Again, writing scenes is the same, and then setups and reminders, payoffs. You have 1 act of setups and payoffs, which would mean you're going to set up some things here that are going to come back in the climax. Pretty simple. All right. Now let's move over to the practical half-hour TV framework. So this is for half-hour TV, obviously. And it can also be for sitcoms and that sort of thing. But again, the beginning is the same. You still have the beliefs, still have the concept. Now we have recurring characters. So these are going to be characters that we will see regularly in the show. And who knows how many there will be, but these will be the characters we're seeing over and over again. We still have 4-corner opposition, and then we also have episodic characters that exist only in a single episode, or they are occasional characters that are not present every episode. You can also put them in and continue as necessary. Now, in the character hierarchy and relationships, there is one important element to say here, which is depending on the episode, characters in a sitcom or characters in a half-hour TV show, they can shift alliances drastically depending on that particular episode's conflict. So when we have these recurring characters up here, who's allied with who might be very different if depending on the particular episode's conflict, depending on which recurring character happens to be at the center of this episode's conflict, because that can also shift. Sometimes you can have a show where the main character never ever changes, or sometimes you have shows where other side characters or other recurring characters take more of a driver's seat in this particular episode conflict. You have key story locations, as usual, season 1, key locations, so on and so forth. You can continue that forward. And then you have the chess moves. Now we send the pieces of the story in motion. Now, in terms of character arc, in a sitcom, so specifically talking about a sitcom here, your characters never learn. Because if they learn, you can't write another episode. At the end of each episode, your characters will revert back to their old ways, and any learning they did in this episode will be soon forgotten. This does not have to be the case in your story. There are obviously TV shows and even half-hour TV where there's a lot of change that is made, but that is just up to you. But just know that if you're writing something that's very traditional 90s or early 2000s sitcom, your characters aren't really going to learn any lessons. They are going to be stuck in the unending circle of returning to their old ways. And that's essentially how it works. Now, if you're writing a sitcom, a lot of the times you have an A plot and a B plot. And so here, that is what I have expressed for you. So in the story outline here, I have outlined, I believe it is 8 episodes that are in here. And I have an A plot and a B plot for you. So, and then take a look at this video by Dan Harmon and Adult Swim, and he breaks down the A plot and the B plot of a Rick and Morty episode and kind of shows you the two plots that are occurring together. So definitely take a look at that, and that can give you a sense as to what your two plots might look like. And then again, you have this all the way down to 8 episodes. Finally, again, setups, reminders, and payoffs. Just like before, we have story symbols in motion. What are the important items or objects in your story, and how are they moving through your different episodes until you get to your climactic episode? And that is the half-hour TV framework. Now, finally, we have the practical television framework. This is for hour-long episodes. So again, usual stuff here: beliefs, concept, key characters. That never really changes, right? No matter what kind of story you're telling, even if you're telling like a parable, they're going to have these 3 core elements, right? Story is a 3-in-1 trinity: beliefs, philosophical conflict, concept, external conflict, characters, emotional conflict. 3-in-1. And again, you have that 3-in-1 in each individual character as well, right? Belief, need, want, philosophy, emotion, external. Now on 4-corner opposition, I have one note here that's worth mentioning, which is depending on the size and scale of your TV show, you may have multiple antagonists or multiple protagonist characters in their own storylines, like Game of Thrones. So just keep that in mind. You might have sort of a kaleidoscoping or fractaling character web here, where you've got different major timelines going on that have their own kind of character webs that fit into your larger character web, but that just depends on the size and scale of what it is you're trying to write. All of this is the same: story location, story items, chess moves. Now we get to this. This is important. So full season 1 story circle. So this starting outline uses one story circle, one single story circle, to encompass the big beats of the entire first season. This is an idea on how to think of the tent-pole moments of a season of television. This is an idea based upon an 8-episode television season, and if you want to expand your season length, you simply add more 4s. Now remember, okay, I want to explain this. When I say add more 4s, what do I mean? Notice that the 4, the adapt to the inciting problem and choice of commitment in a single act, is where you have the most scenes, right? Where essentially these 2 beats are playing together. You got your problem, and now we're adapting to that problem, right? In a season of TV, you have episodes that are essentially this, right? So, in the pilot, episode 1, we're going to establish the characters, we're going to establish what the goal is after, and we are going to have our inciting incident of the story, and then handle that, right? We're going to have our adapt, have our choice of commitment. So, I have used Breaking Bad as an example here because I think it's super, super clear and helpful. Notice I say origin story established in the pilot in episode 1, okay? That's how you should think of your pilot episode. The pilot episode is the origin story of the TV show that we're going to be watching. So in terms of Breaking Bad, in the pilot, we go from Walt being the teacher to Walt being the meth cook with Jesse, right? We establish the origin story of the show. In the same way, in the pilot of Rick and Morty, we establish Rick and Morty as our characters that are going to be going on adventures together, right? That is done in the pilot episode. We establish the origin story. So by the end of episode 1, Walt and Jesse are together making meth. We have established the concept of the show. Now, episode 2, this becomes, like I was talking about, adapting, choices of commitment, right? We're solving the problems that were opened up in episode 1. And now episode 3 of the show is the season inciting incident. Okay? This is the inciting incident for our now meth dealers. Okay? This is very important to understand because a lot of the time you will hear writers discuss the inciting incident in the pilot, but they will forget this one. So this inciting incident establishes the concept of the show. The origin story is established. This inciting incident is saying, okay, now that we have established the concept, now that we have our characters together doing their thing, what new problem arises for the characters that are already now getting comfortable in their new world? And it's very clear. It's very important to understand because that is going to help. This really kicks the season into a new gear, whereas this one used the pilot to establish the concept of the show itself. So, hopefully that is clear. Then, right, when we have our 3, now we are solving that again, right? We're adapting, making choices of commitment until we get to the midpoint episode. Now, the beat 5 is going to be the season goal achieved, and this is likely going to be connected to episode 3 when we had our season inciting incident. It also may be connected to the origin story in terms of why the characters decided to get started in the first place, right? So in Breaking Bad, Walt wants to get money for his family, and then he's gonna encounter a new problem, but then we're gonna have this season goal achieved. We've actually got what we're looking for at the halfway point of the season. Then in the same episode, we have the midpoint problem, the surprise problem of this season, this massive loss, and the episode is going to end on a down note like never before. So you have a situation where the characters are worse off than they were back at the pilot, right? They have never been so down bad, is the idea. Then they're going to be solving problems, trying to survive, until we get to the season finale, which is going to be, in this case, episode 8. This is where we have our pivotal climactic problem, our climactic choice, and then the new character status quo for these characters. So this is supposed to give you this larger sense of how your entire season is going to go from a big picture beat perspective. And what this is really supposed to be helping you do is giving you that origin story, giving you this beat to think about. What is the season inciting incident for the characters that are now already past the origin story, right? So Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man. Now who is Spider-Man? Now that he's Spider-Man, what problem is he dealing with, right? That's the idea. Then the midpoint episode, they get what they want, and then everything goes wrong like never before, massive loss, and then finally you have your season finale. Now, we have the story outline for the hour-long episodes. For a TV series, though an episode is 60 pages, it will likely be a single story circle. So here, in a feature, you have 30, essentially more or less 30 pages per act. So Act 1 is 30 pages, Act 2 is 30 pages, Act 3 is 30 pages, Act 4 is 30 pages, and you end up with a 120-page screenplay. Now, you might have an act that runs 20 pages, you might have an act that runs 40 pages. Again, this is not an exact science, but that's how it should kind of feel, right, to standardize it. However, in a hour-long TV episode, though it is 60 pages, it will still likely be only a single story circle full of multiple character groups going through their own paths, right? So a lot of the times, if you're writing a show like Game of Thrones, you're writing a show like The Last Kingdom, which is what I use for the four-corner opposition example, you have these characters that have their own webs, their own worlds, where a lot of different timelines are going on, right? Multiple plots. You might have an A plot, a B plot, a C plot, a D plot, even an E plot or an F plot, right? You've got a lot of stuff going on. Because of that, we are jumping from character group to character group a lot, which means that we don't want to overload the structure, right? We need to allow the different groups, the different plot lines to have their developments without trying to shoehorn too much structure into the episode. Because of that, it's best to kind of think of the story as one key big circle, and each character group can have their own story circle, and I've said ideally you want to move the different pieces of the circle in unison for stronger pace. That doesn't have to be the case for every single episode. Some characters are going to encounter a climactic moment when other plot lines are not, but generally speaking, we don't want to have a situation where we feel like we've got this super fast climactic pace over here and then absolutely nothing is going on for this other character, right? But again, that's not a hard and fast rule, because sometimes you can use that kind of pacing to create big moments and then take a breather by going to another plot group. So it's not an exact science. You have to kind of shimmy some of this stuff. But if you have a very small cast, I recommend only an A plot and a B plot. And if you have a larger cast, then just separate them. A plot, B plot, C plot, D plot. If you're new to writing, or you're new to writing something like this, I would recommend not doing more than 4 different plot lines, but again, it's your life. And then again, I have listed out just A plot, B plot here, and again, if you want to copy paste and create C plots and D plots, you totally can, but this is for an 8-episode season. I also would recommend that you not try to write 12 episodes a season or 15 episodes a season if because like you can, and again, if you are going to do that, you add more episodes in this section or you add more episodes in this section, right? Essentially in between the tentpole moments, right? This is a tentpole moment, tentpole episode, tentpole episode. So if you want to elongate the episodes, you're just adding more of these episodes. But again, I like it to be a bit shorter because then the pace stays strong and we don't have too many filler episodes. I'm sure you've watched a TV show that has 20 episodes a season and you start to get lost in the mess of like what's going on here because they have a lot of filler. There's a lot of basic problem solving and that sort of thing going on. And I don't want to waste my entire life watching TV. So again, setups, reminders, payoffs, just as usual. We have the different setups and payoffs and how might they move through the different episodes of your story. And that is the refreshed, hopefully final version of the Practical Story Framework, and it's 4 different versions. Again, you can find these by going to practicalscreenwriting.com, scrolling down this first page, clicking this button here, and you can either download them by clicking this button here, or you can open them up, and if you have Google Drive, you can click File, make a copy, and it will add that copy to your Google Drive.